Theo, I've been in about 12, maybe 14 rookie drafts at this point, and anytime someone drafts Troy Franklin in the 2.8 to 2.12, the late second round, I always think they're kind of stupid. I'm ready to be wrong about that, but is your initial feelings about Troy Franklin, a fourth round player in the real NFL draft, being drafted in the second round of rookie drafts, strike you as a bad move for any dynasty managers?
I did it once. To catch up a little bit, just to catch up. But I'm also like you say, I've done 14 rookie drafts, and I'm like, come on, man, let's pump up the volume a little bit.
Yeah.
So
how many have you done?
I mean, do we say it on here? Is this?
Yeah.
I thought this was like Fight Club a little bit. No,
I have another 30 to go. So I mean, it's not. Okay, they're just rolling out slow.
I'm probably, 28 in. Yeah. I got one who just started up today, so we're rocking and rolling constantly in the rookie draft streets. But I don't know, Troy Franklin. It was sort of this weird thing because me and you have talked about this, Alan, about how sort of the narratives kind of change in Dynasty. So Troy Franklin falls out at day 2. Everybody's all upset about this. Then he sort of lands perfectly on day 3. It's with his college quarterback. He's got the chance for an immediate opportunity. And then you have a lot of very smart people who are sort of on Troy Franklin as this player to target in drafts. I saw Jax Falcone, our friend from the Undroppables. He was a guy that popped up in their model, which had a couple of really good hits. I know the guys at RotoViz are really into Troy Franklin. So there's some people on Troy Franklin. I think for me, I'd rather take a chance on those day 2 guys or sort of pivot positions. It's a tough bet. I don't want to be without Troy Franklin, but I think he's like if you're a portfolio manager, he's like a 5% guy. You want just a little bit.
But don't you? I mean, you're going to really pass on Roman Wilson. You're going to pass on Marshawn Lloyd. You're going to pass on Polk for a player drafted in the 4th round. I mean, at some point, I guess really that's my first question for you. Does draft capital not matter anymore?
I think it matters slightly less, but it's still a stagnant data point. But we have had multiple hits now over the last couple of years where guys are hitting out of that range. Certainly the 4th round. We talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown, and that's sort of like what Troy Franklin's rookie draft ADP is at, Alan. It's sort of like Amon-Ra St. Brownish, where people are willing to kind of overlook. Yeah, and I'm not comping the player. I'm just comping sort of the rookie draft scheme where Amon-Ra St. Brown fell to day 3, and then rookie drafters were still very enthusiastic about drafting him somewhere between the early 2nd, late 2nd. In most leagues. He never fell to the 3rd round. People like the immediate opportunity and they like the college production. Coincidentally, they're both Pac-12 wide receivers. So I don't know. For me, it's I most of the time I did the Jermaine Burton. When I was head to head with Troy Franklin or Jermaine Burton, I went Jermaine Burton. Jermaine Burton's a guy who I actually drafted a ton of. We discussed this on Sonic Truth, this week about how Jermaine Burton's a guy that I actually head to head. I went Burton over Wilson a couple times just because of the quality of the quarterback play.
Yeah. By the way, I wasn't. I was listening to you. I was retweeting from all the different accounts, is why I was doing that. So anyone looking on there, just don't. I've gotten yelled at in the beginning of my podcast before. They're like, "How come you don't pay attention to the guests at the beginning?" I'm like, "Listen, I'm my own producer here, so a little bit."
I want constant eye contact across the street. Yeah, I want. Yeah, there you go.
There you go. I should tell everyone that the RotoWire Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks today. Now, you've seen Prize Picks everywhere, guys. It's where you choose more or less and the projections that are on, the stats that are on the app. And our code is ROTOPOD, ROTOPOD, and you can get 100% match there. So Prize Picks, thank you. And also Circa Las Vegas. Theo, you've been out to Circa, right?
I love Circa. I'll be at Circa this summer when I go out to Vegas to draft for, FFPC, NFFC drafts.
What month?
I guess that would be the beginning of September. Okay. I'll be there for opening weekend. I'm not staying for Sunday though. I'm actually going to travel back, I think, on the red eye Saturday night. I usually do a longer trip. I do the first Sunday, but I'll be there for the Thursday opener and then the Brazil game on Friday.
Oh, cool.
And I like popping over to Circa, not necessarily Stadium Swim, but the that's fun.
The book.
But the book is incredible.
Yeah.
The book is incredible.
There no limits on props there. The best menu of props. So yeah, no, Circa Las Vegas. We're going there in July. RotoWire, we're doing our annual trip there again. Thank God.
Awesome.
You know, gambling.com parent company has been good to us, bringing us back there. So yeah, they're another sponsor of this podcast today. So go to Circa Las Vegas. They have like these awesome packages. You could do your fantasy football draft out there where you book out a cabana and they give you the whole bells and whistles. So check that out, Circa Las Vegas. All right, we're talking about rookies that Theo and I laugh at you when you take them in our drafts because they're such bad picks. Only morons would take these players. Now we're just exaggeration for clarification. So, Theo, who's somebody that every time that you see drafted, let's start with round one, that you're like, thank God someone else, and I know you love every player in round one, but every time someone else takes that player, you're like, okay, I'm happy they left someone else for me. So it could be a player, and at what pick do you see this happening?
For me, it's the Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Legette first round drafters because those guys fall
that
to
happens?
the second.
That
I've
happens?
seen it a few times. There was a couple of high volume guys who were who I saw in some of these FFPC leagues who were pushing Xavier Legette up. Sort of like I think it's a sort of a contrarian play to the market and an opportunity. It's sort of an anti Deontay Johnson bet. I certainly wasn't making it. I think I took Xavier Legette once when he fell to like the 211 in a super flex. Right. I actually traded to go get that pick. I felt that was a little too late, but there was sometimes where you saw Ricky Pearsall getting pushed up the board, whether it was a Deebo Samuel manager or Brandon Ayuk manager, or somebody like yourself, Alan, who just is sort of bullish about, you know, what could happen here. Yeah. But I think it's just sort of it's a difficult bet to make. You're pushing these kind of older wide receivers up into a range where you're somewhat reaching for them, where other people are going to have a number of these shares like in the mid-second. So I liked seeing those kind of push-ups. I think it was funny because we talked a long time about the tiers, and once you got past like the 108 in Superflex, I think people kind of had a little trouble like making sense of who to take there at the 109, right. 110, and some managers just kind of shot their shot.
Yeah. Another one that I think people are stupid when they do is, and again, I know you're laughing because we're just using these shock value words, but we really,
bunch of idiots, Alan,
bunch of morons out there,
bunch of fish.
Right. So let's square this one away, and I'm assuming you're going to disagree with me here. Odunze going ahead of the quarterbacks, meaning the Drake Maye and JJ McCarthy. So where do you stand on that? I think you're going to be pro Rome here, but I often, like, again, I understand why people do it, but in Superflex leagues where the quarterbacks are almost too big to fail, and we could point to examples where it has happened, Theo, where do you think that it is wise or unwise for a team to take Odunze in his current situation over McCarthy, Drake Maye?
I think it's a team context situation for dynasty rosters where you're sitting at like the 107 and you have an opportunity to take one of those quarterbacks versus Odunze. If your roster can support it, I think it's I'll answer that in a second.
Yeah. Well, but don't out of context for that. I shouldn't have put it up there to distract you.
Yeah, you're
for those listening on
me.
For those listening on audio podcasts, we have someone making fun of Theo's ring, but Mr. Popinski, Soda Popinski, we'll talk to you in a minute.
I don't think it was a making fun of, Alan. I think it was just questioning what it's all about. But you got me all flustered
all right,
here, Alan.
I'll say this. Let me reset the question here. It's Odunze over the QB3 and QB4. Is that a stupid move in rookie drafts?
I don't think it's stupid. I think it's a roster decision. I think you have to put it in context of the roster that these players are supporting. If you're 3 deep at quarterback, you know that there's an opportunity to take a truly elite wide receiver. Also, Alan, I think if your roster is really stable and you don't need one of these rookies to kind of insert it in your lineup, then I think Odunze is also a really sharp bet to make. Yeah. We're talking about a player that I think is a elite talent and lands in a situation where he's attached to an elite quarterback. He just happens to have early season target competition. A lot of people are scared off on this because of Jackson Smith and Jigba last year.
Yeah.
We've seen this before. You know, we've seen this before where talent wins out. A lot of times talent wins out in the NFL. You see these guys drafted like CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb drafted in the first round. He falls into a situation with Amari Cooper, who at the time was probably ahead of where DJ Moore is in Dynasty right now. and Michael Gallup, who was treated as like a wide receiver 2 in redraft and in best ball at the time. CeeDee Lamb gets drafted there. People say he's kind of boxed out for year 1. And then for the second half of the season, CeeDee Lamb outscores all those guys. So at the end of the day, Rome Odunze could have a path. I think that it's going to be a little bit of be a little patient early on, but he's also going to provide some spike weeks. So I think if you put him in your lineup and you just have to live with it, you're going to get spike weeks out of him. Maybe not the consistent weekly production early in the season. Second half of the season could be another ball game. Talent wins out despite target competition in the NFL. Your fundamental argument is quarterback.
Well, let me
stagnant. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me make it. Let me make the quarterback. Yeah, but I want to go back to Rome Odunze because you made a lot of good points here. It's like CeeDee Lamb's the upside case, JSN is the downside case, right? And our more recent example is the JSN one, which is why probably myself and the recency bias, right? And it's not only does Rome Odunze have to overcome 2 guys that aren't like projections. They're clear alphas in the NFL. And you could talk about Keenan Allen's age, but last year he was a wide receiver 3 in fantasy till he got hurt in week 15. DJ Moore had his breakout. But not only does he have to overcome those 2 guys, Theo, he's got Caleb Williams is still a projection, right? I mean, like, look at what the redraft market is telling us. He's QB 12 to 14, right? 16, something like that. I mean, he, depending on, the site.
But a quarterback going, I think Caleb's quarterback 11 right now.
11
on underdog. And in Dynasty startups, Caleb Williams is going like quarterback 8 in Dynasty startups. So, again, it's a projection, but it's one where like the wisdom of crowds is completely betting on.
Yeah. Our guy, Bronton, still waiting for the buy low segment that we promised them on Brian Robinson. That's a callback from another podcast. So, that I don't think we ever intended on doing that, Theo. But but man, Drake, think about this. If Drake Maye or JJ McCarthy hits even their like better than average, like if they're decent in the NFL, their resale value is going to be so much greater than Rome Odunze if he hit. I mean, even through the first year. I mean, there's no way. Do you even? What's the percentage chance that Rome Odunze pushes both of these wide receivers out of the way and immediately takes control of the the wide receiver room in the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season? It's probably low. And I agree with you. It's Dynasty. It's a low. So don't you think there'll be some opportunities? I'm not saying buy low, but get your money back. There'll be opportunities during the season to say, hey, I'm sort of a middling team. Do you want my 25 first for Rome Odunze? You could probably buy in. Whereas if Drake Maye comes out and we're like, oh my God, this guy is like the next CJ Stroud, it's, he's QB 6 next year in Dynasty startups.
It took JSN, like, you still don't see those obscenely low trades for JSN. And JSN had a very disappointing year and also a worse profile than Rome Odunze. And he also went more than 10 picks later in the draft than Rome Odunze. And he was attached to an offense with a worse quarterback than Rome Odunze. I think Rome Odunze, you're not going to get that opportunity to buy low. I think the
not buy
Rome,
low, but pay
buy at cost kind of deal.
Yeah, not buy low.
I did one time go with a Drake Maye over Rome Odunze in a superflex league where my quarterbacks are in pretty good shape, but a little bit old. I did go with Drake Maye in that league, and I didn't really have to make this decision head to head, but I did end up with a ton of Rome Odunze, and I was really happy to grab him.
All right. Do you who do you have more of in Dynasty right now? You've said you've done 20 plus drafts. Do you have more Jayden Daniels or do you have more Caleb Williams? And then can you kind of give us the exact number of shares you have of each? And there's a follow-up question here, so I just needed the quick answer on those.
I have more Jayden Daniels.
Okay.
And I also was able to draft Jayden Daniels in some Dynasty startups. One was kind of one before the NFL draft and one that I'm currently in right now. So I've been able to kind of balance it out. Caleb Williams, I also took him in a Dynasty startup. I took both of them in single QB leagues, which I know you don't like talking about here on the RotoWire Dynasty Fantasy Football podcast. It's all super flex analysis.
Everyone thinks I don't like talking about single. I don't mind talking. I was on a show there, and the guy goes, "I know you really don't like talking about single." I'm like, no, I like it. I do like it. I'm just, it's just that a lot of players this time of year are super flex startups. That's why I just think it's more relevant information. But I think we should talk to our one QB friends a little bit.
I think that the one QB community is very disrespected, including with Alan Seslowsky.
All right.
Well, I think we got to get you in some single QB Dynasty startup leagues, Alan, to show that you're back with the people.
Yeah, I mean, you know what it is? It really just, I mean, quarterback almost doesn't matter in those leagues. That's the problem. And again, it matters at the top. You get the Josh Allens, they're separators, but you could literally just grab Matt Stafford. There's always a guy on there's a Baker Mayfield type on the waiver wire. Drake May won't even get drafted, or someone like that. I mean, depending on roster size. That's why I just like when all the positions matter.
Well, I will say this. I saw a couple of very smart, very kind of high volume guys that you would equate as like sharp money in Dynasty. Taking Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels, despite having a strong quarterback situation in a single QB league, because it gives you that roster flexibility, Alan, where if Caleb Williams is this guy that could be QB1 overall and sometime in his career, then that gives you an opportunity to maybe trade a Mahomes, trade a Jalen Hurts, trade that perceived like elite asset. And then it's also where you were able to draft those guys in single QB leagues. In single QB leagues, those guys were going like 11, 12, maybe early second for a couple times, where those guys are going to hit. I'm pretty confident in that. Whereas the guys like the Marshawn Lloyds and the Pearsalls, those sort of guys we like, but the chances of them to hit and to kind of gain dynasty value or at least maintain it, there's a little bit more risk with that sort of profile than with these truly elite quarterbacks that are going to kind of hold value and potentially be like top 5, top 6 fantasy assets at the position.
In 99%, maybe even 100%. I'd have to look back of my drafts in the superflex rookie drafts, Theo. Everyone's taking Caleb at the 101. Do you think that there's a chance that those people are going to regret that? Not that Caleb will be bad, but that Jayden Daniels is about to have the Robert Griffin rookie season right now. I mean, he's on Washington, which is a hell of a coincidence, but also we like Cliff Kingsbury as an offensive coordinator. We like the weapons good enough around Jayden Daniels in Washington. So do you think that the Caleb drafters at 101, because that's what ADP says you're supposed to do, might feel stupid?
I don't know if they'll feel stupid. I don't think this is going to be like a Bryce Young, CJ Stroud situation.
No, definitely not.
But this could be like a Justin Herbert versus like peak Lamar Jackson situation,
or Tua versus Herbert.
I don't know about I don't necessarily see the Tua Caleb Williams.
Well, I just meant comparison. Like one guy was good and the other guy broke fantasy for 2 years,
Yeah, no doubt about that. Like there's a chance that if Jayden Daniels is a 1,000-yard rusher, that he's going to absolutely be like break fantasy, put up absurd numbers. I don't think either one's going to get kind of disappointed with drafting these guys though. I think they're both going to be good fantasy assets. If for Caleb, it's sort of like his profile leads a little bit more to like a longevity situation where I think that you might be happier with your pick of Jayden Daniels in 2024, maybe 2025. But if we look back in like 5 years, I think it's Caleb maybe is going to be the better pro. I'm Caleb Williams over Jayden Daniels, but again, Jayden Daniels, I'm super bullish on. I took him in a startup this week. I think he's going to do very, very well.
It bothers me that no quarterback has ever done well in Chicago. And I don't mean that like, hey, it doesn't happen until it happens. They've never had a Caleb Williams type. Jim McMahon is always referred to as the best quarterback, Jay Cutler. And those guys aren't even on the level of Caleb Williams. But maybe there's something about that cold weather, the wind in Chicago, when you get into those post-Thanksgiving games, that does matter a little bit. This is going to be an interesting experiment. Theo, I want to talk about some of the players, continue on talking about players that, are really wasted picks. Someone like Kimani Vidal. I know you like him. I know I like him. The 6th round running back drafted by the Chargers, and the depth chart is seen as easy to climb with a often injured J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, who's literally the encyclopedia version of a Jag. Like when you open Jag, it has Gus Edwards on there. But when you're taking a 6th round running back in the late 2nd round, mid 3rd round, more like, and you're passing on, some, I guess, we can look at the board and see who they're passing on. Is that a wasted pick? Is that just like And I don't want to use the term hopium. It's a little overused, but it does kind of apply here, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about kind of embracing the steam and embracing like the rookie draft riser. It's about as hopeful as it gets.
Yeah.
Now, if it hits and you get an Alfred Morris, Terrell
What's hit?
Davis,
Define hit.
Hit is RB2 I mean, when you're drafting a guy there, like you're going to get a season of RB2.
RB2 is nothing though. It's nothing.
I'm with you on this. I saw it go even crazier than that. The most expensive entry fee league in the FFPC, which I'm not in, but I have a couple of friends there. It's a $5,000 entry league, about as high stakes as it gets for Dynasty, and it's single QB, 5K entry. And someone took Kimani Vidal at the 202 there. 202. Right. I mean, you're talking about as high as it gets. So there's
202 in single QB is probably what, like 210 in superflex. Is that about the equivalent?
Yeah, I think you will just subtract the quarterbacks. So this year subtract 6.
Yeah. Okay, so it's 2. All right, so I was about right.
208, 209. Yep. Okay. So Kimani Vidal going in that range, it's happening in certain leagues. Now, he's sort of like a wide variance player where you're still seeing him in like the mid-third. Yeah. If you're a high volume guy, then you can get your Kimani Vidal if you're just patient. But I think a lot of these people, it's sort of a guy where I got to have a little bit of Kimani Vidal in my dynasty teams. Maybe I have 3 teams. As much as I like a guy like Roman Wilson, I'm going to push this guy up. I'm not making that decision, but I can understand sort of the only bar to climb is Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, who can't stay on the field.
Right.
And they've sort of devalued the running back position as a whole this offseason. The fact that they went out and made Gus Edwards like their signature free agent signing, and then they went out and got J.K. Dobbins for super cheap, almost like a Rashad Penny-like deal, right, like we saw Philly get last year. And then in all offseason long, Alan, when me and you did a show where we talked about NFL prop bets, and it was great. We talked about like Blake Corum going in the 2nd round, 3rd round to the Chargers, how they're going to take one of these Trey Bensons, these Blake Corum types. And that was like sort of like your bet. And it was very smart thinking because they needed a signature running back. They needed a guy who could handle volume. And now they wait and they draft Kimani Vidal. So maybe they viewed the late round running backs as somebody who wasn't much difference between the 3rd round running backs. There's all sorts of scenarios here where they seem to like Kimani Vidal. He was also linked to the Chargers kind of throughout the draft process. If you kind of Google Kimani Vidal Chargers, there was some articles about this like back in March, Senior Bowl, like Chargers spending a little time with Kimani Vidal, just kind of monitoring him, going to the pro days, all that sort of stuff. So I don't know. Maybe they really like Kimani Vidal. It's certainly not a bet I'm making there, though, Alan. I agree with you.
Right. Yeah, because you're passing on, like, I've seen him go ahead, Kimani Vidal. And by the way, I have to give you a little bit of stuff that people don't care about here, which is you've become a very polished podcaster, mentioning the player's name instead of saying he and him. It's very appreciated on this podcast because we submit our podcast at RotoWire to our podcast editor, and that's one of the biggest pieces of feedback, as they say. Someone tunes in the middle, they want to know who you're talking about. So that is your polish is very appreciated on this podcast, Theo Gremminger.
I learned from the best, Alan.
Back to this. So I've seen Kimani Vidal, the 6th round pick by the Chargers, going ahead of Jalen Polk, who was a quasi 1st round pick. He was picked in the first 6 or 7 picks of the 2nd round. And I guess it all comes back to that I really think Drake Maye is going to be an elite. I don't think it's too much of a hot take, but my bold take would be that Drake Maye is a better fantasy producer than Caleb Williams over the next 2 years. Now, again, it is a little hot takey because of the weapons.
It's too hot for me.
But I'll explain why. And, some of our internal guys think that Drake Maye is an underrated rusher, and they have like an upside rushing projection close to 680 or 7 yards for Drake Maye. So that's why. And when you calculate that in with 4 rushing touchdowns, he does pass Caleb Williams, certainly this year.
I actually can see the upside for Drake Maye as a runner. I agree with them.
Yeah.
He lands in an opportunity where, he could be the goal line, threat for New England right off the top. He could also be used on like RPOs. He's a little bit more of like a one-man gang opportunity than if he would have landed with Minnesota and would have just been told like, hey, get in the pocket, complete passes. I think it's going to a little bit more than like opportunistic scrambler. I think could be a like design runner type situation.
Yeah, this is like your run with your hair on fire stuff, like, oh my God, I got to get
run
the hell
for your
out.
life. Run for your life.
Yeah. Throw into the 2 rookie receivers. It could be a little crazy, but in a good way. It could be organized chaos, right? That's how I'm looking at it. And I could be totally wrong, obviously, but my feeling about Drake Maye, from what I've seen from the college scouts here at RotoWire, it's making me bullish on all of these New England players, that the passing game specifically. Also, again, we don't want to get too much into the veteran talk right now, but Antonio Gibson can finally realize his upside as a pass catcher in New England as well. He's not really talked about. We'll save him for our sleepers episode, Theo. All right, so players that we think are just wasted draft picks. Now, everything once you get into the mid to late 3rd round, early 4th and 5th round, those are all wasted picks in a sense where it's very rare you find a Puka Nacua. So we at least want to like take a shot where we think we could get someone that's useful for fantasy, because we know most of those picks we're going to cut anyway. Who are some of the picks going in that like mid 3rd to the end of our draft, Theo, that they literally have no shot and you laugh every time someone drafts them in the later rounds of rookie drafts? I'm talking about there's no chance.
I think that Soencer Ratler still had people kind of backing him despite the very poor draft capital. I think that it's sort of a bet that if Derek Carr struggles, Soencer Rattler is going to get this opportunity.
That's a good one.
Soencer Ratler, though, goes, there was some steam on Soencer Rattler being a day 2 guy, falls completely out of there, then, lands on day 3, gets attached to a quarterback that the Dynasty community sort of soured on in Derek Carr, and people are sort of apologizing for the bad draft capital. I think the NFL told you what they think about Soencer Rattler, and it's a pick where you're still seeing superflex managers make that bet in like the 3rd round, and they're passing on running backs and wide receivers that are very appealing. And in certain non-tight end premium formats, guys like Ben Sinnott fall to the 3rd round occasionally. So there's much better bets to make that are not at the quarterback spot than Soencer Rattler.
Right. Because I just want to repeat what I said, and it just ties into the point you just made, is that the chances of you hitting on your 3rd round pick, 4th round pick, it's almost 0, right? And then the upside is Puka Nacua, Tank Dell, right? So when you're talking about players that matter for your fantasy roster, even would you consider someone like Ty Chandler, the Minnesota Vikings running back who we drafted a few years ago? I almost consider that a hit because we got 2 clarified starts in 3 years. That was the expectation, right? Khalil Herbert, hit. Saved me when David Montgomery was down, when he was still a Bear, right? Those guys I consider hits relative to what they are. There's certain players, and I think Rattler's one of them, where they're just going to rot on your roster, and it's going to prohibit you from picking up. Dude, Brock Purdy was a pickup. Jake Browning was a pickup that mattered. So I think that's why if you're going to take players in this range, at least have a case for them, or else it's just a stupid pick, Theo.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I like your point of the way we need to view these running backs in terms of whether they hit or not. The running back position in Dynasty, most of the guys on your roster are like mercenaries that are going to steal wins for you and steal weeks. It's almost a DFS mentality when it comes to the running back spot, where you're going to get these guys, the Dearness Johnsons over the years that are just sitting there on your roster, and you get 3 weeks out of them. Depending on the depth of your Dynasty rosters, rostering those sort of handcuff situations, rostering those guys who can catch the ball a little bit that might get an opportunity, those guys sort of pay off. And it's happened, the last few years, Alan. Sometimes you even get a bigger hit than that, like with the Raheem Mostert last year, Jamal Williams the year before, Gus Edwards last year, these sort of usable mercenary running backs. Whereas these quarterbacks that are in backup situations, they offer you literally nothing. You can only use them if they win the backup job and if their starter in front of them gets hurt or loses a job through mediocrity.
If someone was hiring you, like when you go to the gym, you hire a trainer, not you, because your gym game is on point, or when you go to a nutritionist to help you with food, if somebody was hiring you, Theo, to help them with rookie draft strategy, what would you tell them to be aware of? What's the common mistake that a lot of even experienced players make in rookie drafts?
I think that a lot of times people will sell out their future, to trade future picks just to kind of get into this current draft.
That's a good one.
And it seems like you're sort of throwing away maybe a third round pick. It doesn't really matter for me in the long term. Even that second round pick, hey, it's okay. I can always kind of get it back. But a lot of times throughout the year, if the rookie you draft doesn't hit, then you can't really trade out of it, and you're stuck with a piece where you're either selling for less or you're having to use to sort of package. Whereas the second round future pick, those are gold. Yeah. Even the third rounders, Alan, how many times have you gotten to a trade negotiation in the Dynasty League where you're pretty close on a trade and you throw in a third rounder just as like icing on the cake and it gets it done? There's certain managers are Dynasty trade calculator people. Certain managers just like accumulating draft picks. Some very sharp managers like to do that. They want to have like an arsenal of draft picks so they can move up in rookie drafts the following year. All this, any reason. I think it's when you kind of sacrifice your future in order to kind of get that guy that's not necessarily a surefire hit and sort of get exposure to that player. Right. I think a lot of times, and I'll give credit to our friend Scott Connor at Dynasty Trades in 5. He will constantly kind of make this decision that this point that you don't have to use a pick. Like re-rolling your pick is not always the worst strategy either, Alan. Like you talk about some of these guys that might not hit, trading like the 311 for a future third, that doesn't usually burn you.
Yeah, that I used to push back on that theory. I'm warming up to it a little bit now, seeing that it's good to have some ammunition, third rounders in the chamber during the season, not necessarily make. So at 308, yeah, sure. We love if Malachi Corley falls to 308. Oh man, I want to draft him. But if you're not someone who's bullish on a player like Malachi Corley or Ray Davis or Javon Baker, having that third in your pocket so you can buy Jake Browning when you lose Joe Burrow, if someone else outbids you, that's important because Jake Browning was on a lot of Final Four teams rosters, meaning like superflex teams that had Burrow and Baker Mayfield, and then nothing else, needed Jake Browning to get there. And had they spent that third rounder on a last year's Javon Baker type and not had it to spend, or to buy Gardner Minshew, or, they would be SOL. How do you say shit? What's the shit out of luck? SOU? No. What is it? What's
do people abbreviate that?
Yeah, well, I'm bringing it in.
It's a tough abbreviation. Doesn't really roll off the tongue. I'll say the one other huge mistake that people make, and a lot of times you'll see sort of a player maybe new to Dynasty, even a really sharp redraft player or really sharp best ball player, they'll get into the Dynasty streets, so to speak, and they start thinking about filling their lineup out during a rookie draft. Where
I do that.
You'll reach for a positional pick because your roster maybe is a little weaker at like running back or weaker at tight end or whatever position. And it's like they want to instantly improve that part of their roster. Whereas if I'm simply most of the time drafting the best pick, then I have the entire summer to make trades and I have an asset that other people in my league are going to want and we're going to be willing to trade for, rather than sort of pushing up that player because my roster needed, a tight end 2 or needed a RB4 or something like that. I think that a lot of times filling out your lineup can be one of the worst things you can do. And Alan, that kind of comes back to your point where there's going to be leagues out there where you're going to see JJ McCarthy or Drake May go ahead of Malik Nabers in superflex drafts. I mean, don't do that one.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because let's talk about Malik Nabers, and if that's a good pick ahead of the quarter. I've seen him go ahead of Jay Daniels. We'll talk about that, but we'll be back in 2 seconds. YouTube audience, you're not going to have to wait. Audio audience, just stick with us for this short break. We're back. I'm Alan Seslowsky, RotoWire.com. You're listening to the RotoWire Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast, and I'm here with Theo Gremminger. That's right. He's here. Of playerprofiler.com. Theo, you follow him as I do at VOG Fantasy. Theo, we'll let everyone know about all the great things you're working on shortly, but I want to continue on with this conversation because we got a good one going here. You bring up Malik Nabers. We see him go ahead of Jayden Daniels often in these rookie drafts. I mean, it flip-flops. There's no right answer here. It's context. It's team dependent. Malik Nabers already valued as the wide receiver 8 in Dynasty before he even steps on the field. Is that a like? Isn't that the upside right there? Or I mean, is that a wise thing? Is that stupid, or is that wise to think about him and value him over someone like Jayden Daniels, which we just spoke about 15 minutes ago, could break fantasy?
I don't think it's stupid. I think Malik Nabers is a truly, truly elite player where most years, he's going to be the 101 in single QB leagues. And there's some years where he could have been taken at the 101 in superflex. This year, he just happens to play with the 2 elite quarterbacks. He happens to be in the same draft as Williams and Daniels. But Nabers is, I think that the wide receiver 8 is fine for him in dynasty startups. Like, you're talking about a player where he's extremely explosive. He's drafted in the top 6. This is the highest drafted wide receiver that New York has ever drafted in the history of their franchise.
Who's before that? Who was the highest before that?
I believe there was Odell was 12.
Yeah.
And there was one other player who was inside of the top 10. I'm drawing a blank.
I mean, when you say New York, do you mean the Jets too? Because they
no, the Giants, the New York Giants. Apologies to your editor. I need to clarify which New York team.
Well, because the Jets, they drafted Keyshawn 1.01
at the 101, and that's the only wide receiver to ever be drafted 101 was Keyshawn. And there was a couple of 102s, Calvin Johnson, Charles Rogers. I believe that's the only 102s. But anyway, Nabers goes 106. They also passed on taking J.J. McCarthy there and kind of solving their quarterback position problems. You later find out that they really didn't value the Michael Penix, Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy guys nearly as much as they did Drake Maye.
Hakeem Nicks in 2009 was 29.
29. There was one more, though, that went inside the top 10.
It was Odell. Thomas Lewis in 1994 was, I don't even know who that is. And then Mark Ingram in 1987, the father, was 28. Was pick 28. You're saying before that?
No, there was. I thought, well, whatever. It was Odell goes 12 overall.
That Kadarius Toney at pick 20.
There was. I want to say there was a Giant that was drafted in the top 10 in the first round. I'll DM you after the show. I'll do my little research.
The audience wants to know too. Ike Hilliard,
I think, right?
Pick 7 in 1997.
There you go. So Ike Hilliard, that was the one.
Okay.
Ike Hilliard goes pick 7. So this is the highest drafted wide receiver the Giants have ever selected. They passed up on quarterback to draft him. This is also a team that lost Saquon Barkley. They immediately need somebody who can fill in as the offensive focal point. You also have kind of historical context here. When Brian Daboll gets a truly elite wide receiver, that becomes the offense. Stephon Diggs was a 160 target guy his first year in Buffalo, and Brian Daboll ran everything through him. Years past in Buffalo, they didn't have any wide receiver sort of in this alpha-like role, and they get an alpha and they use them. So I think this is a perfect scenario. I think Malik Nabers could have 150 targets as a rookie. I think he's going to be a top 10 targeted player in the NFL this year. I think he's going to lead rookies in targets, period. And he also, I think, just has the potential to be a star here. He's extremely explosive. He's fantasy friendly.
Yeah. And I'll add 2 more little pieces of gasoline to your case here. I like what you're saying here is that, one, he probably doesn't need Daniel Jones to be great because he can operate in the short area of the field and get some yards after the catch. And number 2 is that Dak Prescott's going to be available next year on the open market. And it's very easy to see Dak Prescott in a Giants uniform next year. And no matter what you think about Dak's playoff success, Dak Prescott was quarterback 2 in fantasy football last year. So that is a good sign of that. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen, but you've persuaded me that Malik Nabers, because
Giants fans would welcome Dak with open arms. There'd be a parade for him.
Yep. So, because now, who's more valuable right now, Jamar Chase or Trevor Lawrence? I mean, there's a debate there, and I think it's probably Jamar Chase.
Chase.
They were the same rookie draft, right?
No, that was that the same? Yeah, that was the same. You're right.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, point is, he was the 101 locked in Lawrence. Jamar Chase sometimes would go pick 5 or 6, and a lot of the dynasty managers wish they had that one back.
A lot of Najee Harris drafters and a lot of Kyle Pitts drafters wish they would have gone
Yeah.
with Jamar Chase as well, Alan.
Yeah. So the Pitts thing is interesting. All right, okay, because Brock Bowers is on my list to talk about here. We've seen a lot of Eric Ebrons. I mean, TJ Hawkinson, you had to be really patient when you drafted him in the first round, Theo Gremminger. So is Brock Bowers a, quote, stupid pick when Rome Odunze and the quarterbacks are on the board? I've seen in tight end premium formats, Bowers, I'm not talking about start 2 tight ends, super premium, just normal premium. Go pick 5, pick 6.
I mean, tight end premium, you've got to take your shots on Bowers. That's Alan. I mean, the 1.5 premium, to put it in context, Travis Kelce, his sort of elite years, outscored any wide receiver. And Travis Kelce, even with a 1.5 point tight end premium, would have been like a top 6 quarterback in 4-point passing, FFPC type formats.
Yeah,
so
top 5 he was a top 5 overall player in those
top 5 overall player. So Brock Bowers, you're talking about one of the best tight end prospects of all time, and sort of like the argument to not drafting Rome Odunze, it's people have this recency bias on Kyle Pitts, where Kyle Pitts didn't hit, but Kyle Pitts as a rookie gave us 1,000 yards, gave us 70 catches,
right? But it wasn't really impactful. It wasn't
because he didn't score touchdowns.
Right.
Because he didn't score touchdowns.
Right.
If he would have fallen in the end zone like 4 more times as a rookie.
But isn't that a skill? Isn't it like Andre Johnson never scored touchdowns? Julio Jones barely had seasons with double-digit touchdowns. So at some point, isn't that like a skill? It's not a luck thing.
We're going to see about Kyle Pitts as a touchdown scorer this year. This year is going to sort of say a lot about that profile, and he's certainly only 23 years old now, so it's not like we're talking about some finished product. But
true, Kyle
Pitts gave you a season where the targets, the yardage, the receptions were all there. The scheme of the offense, he didn't find the end zone, and that offense was not great anyway. But at the end of the day, I think that Bowers is getting punished a little bit because of the recency bias. Bowers is a guy who had 13 touchdown catches in the SEC as a freshman. He's sort of an overgrown wide receiver himself, but he plays tight end. I think it's a great bet. You also have an offense where Devontae Adams has had 169 or more targets for 3 straight years, but Devontae Adams is getting older.
Right.
There's a chance that you could see Brock Bowers as the number 1 target in Las Vegas next year in 2025. Yeah. And even this year, we have him projected to be tight end 8 overall at Player Profiler in our stats projection. So I think he's going to hit this year. I think he's going to hit long term. And in tight end premium, having one of these top 6 type assets in Dynasty, those guys are always guys you can trade, Alan. Even if Brock Bowers completely flops this year, he's still an asset that you're going to be able to re-roll in tight end premium formats.
Yeah. Okay. So you like him going in those top spots right there. I'm also a little bit, I guess, more optimistic about Gardner Minshew being able to support fantasy assets. I mean, you saw what he was able to do for Michael Pittman. I know there's a lot of
Josh Downs at times too. Josh Downs had spike weeks with Minshew as well. So I'm with you. I think Minshew, it's a little bit of a gunslinger mentality. I think if he gets the job,
that's what you want.
He beats out AOC. I don't think is dead.
No,
but I think it's Minshew. I'd put him like a 65% chance of winning that job.
Yeah, and also
higher than that.
Yeah, no, but there's, again, even if Minshew wins the job, there's benching risk at any moment. Like he's never safe week to weeks. But yes, for the most part, it'll be based on wins. Minshew could be crushing it for you. The team could be 2-4, and they go to, it's one of those things where they're probably going to switch back and forth 3 and 4 times, right? You're going to have pockets of Minshew, pockets of AOC. Interestingly enough, how can fantasy managers balance the excitement of high upside hype with the consistency and reliability that they actually need to draft in these drafts, Theo? So, there's players that get steamed up, the Kimani Vidals we talked about. So what advice would you give to fantasy managers about just picking good, boring players in your rookie draft?
Well, I think we talked about that a little bit with the not trying to fill out your lineup thing. I think that anytime you see a running back sort of steam up with that sort of draft capital, a lot of times people will dive into it like it's an asset that's going to hit. But yeah, Alan, I think sometimes those slightly boring profiles they make more sense for you to take, and they usually have a better hit rate. People are trying to kind of thread the needle as opposed to kind of taking the value that's right in front of them. A guy like Roman Wilson just sort of sitting there.
Yo.
Despite the landing spot that we liked, there was never steam for him in rookie draft season. I actually have a little bit of Roman Wilson FOMO that I didn't take a little bit more, but he fell to such a reasonable range in these drafts, and he falls to a organization where they evaluate the receiver position very well. And I'll put Pat Freiermuth into this mix as well, but George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Martavis Bryant. I mean, you can go back and back and back. Juju Smith-Schuster.
Oh, yeah.
Deontay Johnson.
Mike Wallace was not a first-round pick.
Mike Wallace was the second-round pick. You're absolutely right on that. So Pittsburgh hits when they draft these guys.
Antonio Brown, GOAT status. GOAT.
Well, you got to go way back. Antonio Brown, though, the sixth-rounder. So it's like,
I'm just saying, it's like,
I mean, they killed it, but
not only did he hit, I mean, he hit like in a level of like Tom Brady hitting for, you know what I'm saying? Like that's
arguably the greatest fantasy run ever for a wide receiver was Antonio Brown. Younger listeners who didn't play fantasy when he was around, you're talking about like 22 to 25 points per game for like 5 years. He was like wide receiver 1 for us in points per game, or wide receiver 2 in points per game for like 5 straight years.
Yeah,
it was unbelievable.
It was the peak Justin Jefferson season for like 4 seasons in a row, plus another upside one. Anyone that you think is being a little overvalued right now in rookie drafts, or again, this ties into our theme where I can't believe he went there. Now you talked about some of
the real steam guy is, and it's not a guy that I think either one of us dislike, but you talked about the Kimani Vidal steam.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen more steam on a running back than Jaylen Wright. Jaylen Wright has steamed up.
The 4th round rookie on Miami Dolphins.
He's a 4th round rookie. Where we've seen guys hit out of the 4th round. It's not like Dameon Pierce was a 4th round pick. He gave us a very good rookie season. Michael Carter gave us a bunch of good weeks as a 4th round pick. He did. Allen gave us, if you're by your definition, but regardless, it's not like a bet that we're continually making a 4th round running back. Jaylen Wright is going ahead of Marshawn Lloyd. He's going ahead of Blake Corum. Jaylen Wright in some single QB leagues in FFPC is going at like the 112, 111. So you're talking about he never lasts past like the 205. Even in Superflex, I'm checking a Superflex board right now.
Yeah, I mean, he goes 205 in Superflex and Sleeper. He doesn't. He used to go like 208, 210, and I saw him dripping to the 3rd in the beginning. That's over. It's over, Johnny.
207 floor when it comes to Superflex. Like, he's not going to last past the 207. And it's just the ultimate. We like the profile of Jaylen Wright, but again, it's a very crowded backfield situation. This might be a wait till 2025, and he takes over for Mostert in 2025. And there's still a ton of value in that, obviously, with what Mostert did last year and the Mike McDaniel offense. But
then they're just going to draft like another Jaylen Wright. You know what I'm saying? It's not like a guy where they draft him in the 2nd round or in the 1st round of the real NFL draft, and then they ascend to the job. When you draft a Dameon Pierce type, and again, Pierce and Wright are 2 different players, they draft another guy like that when Raheem Mostert leaves. And now, they're not just going to be like, okay, Jaylen Wright, it's yours, and Devon Achane. So I think that's the danger there. But you could also argue, you and I have talked about this, that Jaylen Wright was technically a 3rd round pick because Miami traded their 25 3rd to draft Jaylen Wright in the 4th. But, that's moving the shells around a little bit.
But anyway you cut it, it's Jaylen Wright steam like I've never would have imagined.
Yeah.
He was a guy that I was like, I'm going to get a bunch of Jaylen Wright at like the 211, 212, based on where he landed in the draft. And that would have been a range where I would have been happy to take him. But when you start seeing him pushed up to the 203, the 201, the 202, even in Dynasty startups now, you're starting to see Jaylen Wright get really, really, really pushed up. People are sort of forgetting about Devon Achane, about how great he was last year. So you're basically going to have to overcome Mostert. You're going to have to overcome Achane. It's a situation where you really might have to wait the entire year for Jaylen Wright. The contingent upside is absolutely immense, but you're drafting sort of a contingent upside bet over players that could hit instantly and be guys that are potentially in your lineup right away. There's multiple wide receivers. And also, I think when you look at Marshawn Lloyd and Blake Corum, they're 1 player away. Those guys could be handcuff pluses. Lloyd probably a better chance of being a handcuff plus because we haven't seen Sean McVay really utilized 2 backs at once. Could change it up this year. We never know. But end of the day, Wright over Lloyd is something that I wasn't able to do. I'm a Lloyd over Wright when they're head-to-head in these rookie drafts, but I'm really not seeing that. I'm seeing a lot more Wright ahead of Lloyd.
And you were talking about the Rams backfield a moment ago. We've seen Kyren Williams miss, multiple windows of multiple games. So Corum probably has a couple windows of 2 to 3 weeks where he's going to be, like in seasonal leagues, the all-in fab guy, right? Like week, So last topic I want to talk about with you, Theo, is Bo Nix in the first round. He's going in that same place that Kenny Pickett went in. I'm not sure if he's going to be a long-term starter. I don't expect a high ceiling thing. So is Bo Nix a stupid pick in the 1-9 to 1-11 range of superflex rookie drafts, or are you getting a starting quarterback way too cheap?
I think I'm somewhere in between on these.
You can't be. You got to pick a side.
So I'll say it's not stupid to take him at the 109 because
I agree with you.
Basically, Sean Payton has attached his job to Bo Nix. They take Bo Nix at the 12 overall pick in the NFL.
They reached a full round ahead of where he was projected to go.
But they still made the pick. So at the end of the day, nobody's going to talk about that they reached if he hits. He also has a little bit of sneaky rushing upside where Bo Nix was very successful on the ground at Oregon, especially 2 seasons ago. He had an absurd amount of rushing touchdowns. But Bo Nix is going to have the starting job. He's got a little bit of rushing floor. And I think he's got very strong job stability. Yeah. Job security is there too for him, Alan. Whereas Michael Penix, you're going to have to wait probably maybe a considerable amount of time for Michael Penix to get on the field. Bo Nix will be there week 1. And he was drafted like the whole Kenny Pickett versus Bo Nix thing. Kenny Pickett was not going inside the top 15.
He was at pick 20 or something like
20,
that.
Yeah. So it was sort of it's a little bit of apples and oranges.
But he was QB1. That's also powerful.
He was QB1. But Bo Nix going at pick 12 ahead of many players ahead of Brock Bowers, who would have instantly helped Denver immensely, ahead of several guys in the defensive secondary, ahead of all those edge rushers that people were getting very enthusiastic about in this draft class. So for me, Bo Nix, Denver has really, really invested in him. And the early reports and returns are that the organization really, really likes Bo Nix and they're into him. At the end of the day, like you said, maybe every other team looked at the Bo Nix pick as that was a reach, but Denver took him there and they're going to design their system around Bo Nix being successful. It's going to be a lot of low ADOT looks. It's going to be some rushing opportunities. There's going to be a high passing volume. We've seen, he's not Drew Brees, but we've seen a kind of a low ADOT offense on a lot of what Drew Brees was doing was a lot of quick throws. And then, of course, Drew Brees was the man and would be able to turn it up and make all big touchdown passes as well. I don't know what his ceiling is, but I think Bo Nix has a higher floor than a lot of people are giving him credit for in Dynasty.
Yeah, he had unbelievable college stats, man. 45 touchdowns, only 3 picks. He's a player that takes care of the ball with a 78% or so completion percentage. His best comparable over on Player Profiler is Derek Carr. I think that would be a very successful pick at pick 9 in Superflex. That's what I'm saying. If that's the median outcome, if it goes a little bit better, a little bit worse than that, where would Derek Carr go in his peak seasons in this draft? That's how you have to think about it, right? He would go pick 9, no doubt. You're getting a starting quarterback for the next half decade, and if there's upside for more, I like that a lot. Penix is a totally different bet you're making. You're basically drafting the Falcons offense for next year, but you're overpaying now for what's going to be a value later. It's like what a lot of general managers have to do when they sign elite quarterbacks. When the Chiefs signed Mahomes to that monster contract, it's looking like a deal now. At the time, people said, oh my God, $400 million. But meanwhile, he's not even one of the top 2 or 3 highest paid quarterbacks in the league right now. So you overpay now for a value later. Theo Gremminger, you did it, baby. You came on here on the RotoWire podcast. You performed like a champion. You are a champion. I adore you and I love everything you're doing. So we follow you at VOG Fantasy on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter. That's what we call it here. And I want you to let everybody know 1 or 2 of the most important things that you're working on that they should follow right now. And by the way, if you love videos like this, before Theo starts doing his plugs, You can pay us back by hitting the like button. You could write a comment if you want, no obligation, but just tapping that like button shows us that you love Theo on the podcast today like I do. So consider doing that. Theo, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. You could also find all of my written work at playerprofiler.com. I'm coming up with probably 2 articles a week during the summer. During the season, I write the waiver wire article, which is sort of a labor of love at this point.
Do you like writing or podcasting better?
I like them both. That's a great question, Alan.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Which one, if you can only do one for the rest of this season, what would it be? Write or podcast?
Podcasting,
okay.
Probably because, but writing, it's sort of it's like the workaholic mentality in fantasy football. I'm just constantly grinding.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can find my podcast over at Player Profiler, also Player Profiler YouTube. Alan and I broadcast the Sonic Truth Dynasty podcast with Matt Kelly, the Podfather. I also host Dynasty Life, press coverage, and then I do First Class Fantasy with Billy Muzio. We came back yesterday.
He's back
just for First Class Fantasy. Billy's back just for me. So
yeah,
we're once a week, Thursdays at 3:30. But I'd say Dynasty Life this time of year. If you enjoy Alan's podcast, we're doing similar show structure, covering topics that are going to help you win in Dynasty. Press coverage, redraft, best ball, little Dynasty. But ring. Okay, so this is
hold on a second. Let me explain to the audio podcast listeners first.
Sure.
So we have a question in the chat from Mr. Popinski, who is Soda Popinski, the famous Punch-Out character, and Theo is wearing what looks like a wedding ring on his middle finger, opposed to his ring finger. So he wants an explanation. Give the brief explanation.
It's an Oura ring. Oura. It's sort of like a Whoop bracelet. If somebody knows what that is, it tracks like your fitness. It tracks like health. It's covered in rubber because I was just at the gym. Right. But it's an Oura ring. You can Google that one. Does a lot of cool stuff.
All right, there you go.
And if you use the code Alan Seslowsky when you check out on Oura, you get 0 off.
All right, so show the ring. There you go. Oh, it's right there. So you
I would not do that, Alan. I would not do that.
You're too much of a gentleman. Yeah. All right, everybody. We'll be back next week with another Dynasty Fantasy Football podcast. But I want everyone also to remember you can get behind RotoWire's paywall right now for free. Right? We're here. We're not here for our health. We're here so you'll possibly go check out RotoWire as well. RotoWire.com/pod. RotoWire.com/pod. I'll say it one last time. RotoWire.com/pod. Put in your email and the paywall unlocks. We have all our premium content. You don't have to put in your credit card or anything like that. If you don't like what you see after 2 days, it lapses. But we guarantee you're going to love it and you're going to sign up. All right, Theo, we'll see everybody next week with another Dynasty Fantasy Football podcast.